Wasn't Big out at California 3-4 weeks and Snoop never saw him? Snoop never came to smoke nothing with him, but it was a whole lot of love? Come on, man. Shit just don't add up.
Not true, Snoop Doggy Doggy Dog. Snoop Lion. That's what you need to keep your name. Snoop Lion, because you always lying.
You know what I mean? Pac was trying to disrespect Nas. It definitely wasn't the way Snoop said it. Once again, I don't know why he keep putting his spin on it. You know what I mean? It's you know, I wish somebody can ask him that.
Snoop wasn't even next to us when that happened. You know what I'm saying? Like, he bugging. He knew damn well it wasn't like that.
So Snoop was nowhere around?
No.
So when Snoop Dogg starts spinning one of his wild stories, everybody leans in. It doesn't even matter what it's about. Tupac, Biggie, some wild night on tour, or a random run-in that sounds like it belongs in a Hollywood script. People are hooked instantly. Snoop has that aura, that voice, that presence. He could be talking about going to the grocery store and somehow make it sound like an epic movie scene. But the twist is that behind the scenes, insiders have been whispering for years that a lot of these tales aren't just exaggerated, they're flat out made up. Over the years, Uncle Snoop has been called out again and again for dropping stories that feel questionable, overblown, or just plain unbelievable. And yet, the public eats them up. That's the power of Snoop's charisma. He can blur the line between fact and fiction, and most people won't even notice until someone calls him on it. You know that old saying, there are always three sides to every story. One person's version, the other person's version, and then the messy truth hiding somewhere in the middle. Sometimes when two people live through an event, a third person comes in to give their version, claiming to set the record straight. But if that third person wasn't even there or only caught glimpses, their version can end up being completely off the mark. That's exactly what people believe Snoop Dogg did when he told his version of a supposed run-in between Nas and Tupac right in the middle of the infamous East Coast versus West Coast beef. To really understand how this even came about, you have to rewind to 1996. Nas had just dropped his second album, It Was Written, and the opening track, The Message, carried a line that would go down in hip-hop history. Fake thug, no love, you get the slug, CB for gusto. On paper, that line wasn't aimed at anyone specific. It could have been a general jab, a throwaway diss line like so many rappers throw into their verses. But Tupac didn't take it that way. Pac, who was in the middle of the biggest feud of his life with Biggie, Puffy, and the whole bad boy camp, took it personal. And if you knew Pac, once he felt like someone disrespected him, it was a wrap. That one misunderstanding was enough to put Nas right in Pac's crosshairs, lumped in with his biggest enemies. So fast forward a little, the MTV Video Music Awards were going down in New York City, and Pac was in town with the Death Row Squad. The air was already thick with tension. Death Row and Bad Boy had been trading shots on wax and in interviews, and the streets themselves felt like they were about to explode. The city was buzzing, people were choosing sides, and any small spark could have lit the powder keg. This was the backdrop when Pac and Nas were destined to cross paths, and this is where Snoop comes in with his infamous version of what supposedly went down that night. According to Snoop, the story played out like a scene straight out of a gangster flick. He claims that when Tupac rolled up with the Death Row entourage, Nas was there deep, backed by close to 100 men from Queens. Snoop paints the picture like Pac immediately started barking at Nas, cursing him out, throwing insults, letting that death row energy out in front of everybody. Meanwhile, in Snoop's version, Nas just stood there cool as ice, surrounded by his crew, but never losing his composure. According to Snoop, it was like a standoff between two powerful forces, Death Row on one side, Queensbridge on the other, ready to explode into violence. But instead of letting it spiral out of control, Nas supposedly chose peace. He stood his ground, but instead of throwing punches or pulling triggers, he diffused the situation. Jay-Z, Biggie, and even Snoop himself have retold versions of the story that make Nas sound like the wise peacemaker, while Pac comes off like the reckless hothead who didn't even realize how close he was to getting wiped out that night. But here's the problem. Snoop wasn't even there. His version of events, straight fiction. And the first person to check him on it publicly was Napoleon, one of Pac's tightest allies from the Outlaws. Napoleon wasn't just around Pac, he lived with him, rode with him, went where he went. If anybody knew the truth about that night, it was him.
Was Tupac having issues when he was in prison? Because I know Snoop, he always say that he was hearing bad things, so he chose Suge Knight to get him out.
And according to Napoleon, Snoop's tale was nothing but smoke and mirrors. There wasn't some massive standoff, there wasn't a near ambush, there wasn't chaos. The reality was way different, a lot calmer and far more respectful.
That's a false narrative that I think Snoop was pushing. You know what I mean? Pac, for a fact, he wasn't really, he had a lot of, like, he used to send us pictures, and his pictures on the internet when he was taking pictures with New York dudes up in Clip. I guess people, they like to say that so then they can vouch for some other rumors that's being spread about Pac to try to put dirt on his name. You know what I mean? So it wasn't a fact they was disliked, he was holding it down.
Napoleon swore that when Pac and Nas finally came face to face, it wasn't about disrespect. There was no yelling, no screaming, no tension ready to blow. It was two men talking, laying their cards on the table, and choosing respect over drama. Pac aired out how he felt, Nas responded in kind, and they settled it like men. In fact, Pac even promised Nas right then and there that once he got back to Los Angeles, he would take Nas's name out of any diss tracks where it had popped up. He didn't want unnecessary beef clouding things, but tragically, Pac never got the chance to follow through on that promise.
Big got in that studio and said, I don't know why this Snoop's calling me. I'm not telling this where I'm at.
Just weeks later, he was gone. The bullet that took his life also froze that moment in history, leaving fans forever wondering what could have been if Pac had lived long enough to patch things up with more of his rivals. Still, the point was clear. There was never some explosive showdown the way Snoop described it. And if you think Napoleon was just covering for Pac, protecting his legacy, all you have to do is look at what Nas himself has said about that night. Nas later confirmed that while there was tension, the encounter was nowhere near the way Snoop dramatized it. Tupac never disrespected him face to face. Instead, they squashed the misunderstanding, dapped each other up, and walked away with respect. No shouting, no near fight, just two legends making peace. That alone makes Snoop's dramatic retelling look suspicious at best, manipulative at worst. But Snoop didn't stop there. He's got a whole arsenal of tall tales he's been spinning for years, and Pac isn't the only one caught up in them. Another story Snoop loves to tell is about the time Pac was locked up. According to Snoop, Pac was in real danger behind bars, surrounded by enemies, with his life on the line. And Snoop claims he was the one who went to Suge Knight, convinced him to step in, and ultimately played the role of savior by helping get Pac out on bail. It's a dramatic, movie-worthy story. The problem? Napoleon once again called cap on it. He said Pac wasn't in danger at all in prison. In fact, the opposite was true. Pac was respected. People inside vibed with him, listened to him, and showed him love. Napoleon, who visited Pac during that time, said Pac never once mentioned feeling unsafe or threatened. Did he want out of prison? Of course, nobody wants to sit behind bars. But the idea that Snoop played some heroic role in convincing Suge to bail him out, according to those who were closest to Pac, that never happened. That was Snoop rewriting history to make himself look like the hero. And Snoop's habit of bending the truth didn't just stop with Pac, it stretched all the way to Biggie. Over the years, Snoop has pushed this image of himself and Biggie as brothers, full of love and respect for one another. But Gene Deal, Puff Daddy's former bodyguard, shut that narrative down in one interview after another. According to Gene, Biggie didn't respect Snoop. He wasn't fond of him, he wasn't his friend. Gene straight up questioned why Snoop always painted himself as the middleman, the bridge, the peacemaker between East and West. In Gene's eyes, it was convenient storytelling. It made Snoop look like the calm, cool voice of reason in the middle of the chaos. But the reality wasn't anywhere near as friendly as Snoop wanted the public to believe. Gene pointed out something else that hit hard. He said, if Snoop was really that close to Biggie, why didn't we ever see it until after both Biggie and Pac were dead? Think about that. When Biggie was alive and actually out in California, staying there for weeks at a time, Snoop never pulled up. He never smoked with him, never hung out, never ate together. Yet after Biggie's death, suddenly Snoop's got all these deep stories about their bond. Gene wasn't buying it, and he wasn't the only one. In one of Snoop's most dramatic tales, he claimed that sometime after Pac's death, he ran into Biggie in Atlanta. According to Snoop, they had this private, emotional conversation, just the two of them. Biggie supposedly opened up about how much he loved Pac, how he never wanted him dead, how he regretted things he'd said, and even apologized like a man, Snoop painted it like a powerful, movie-like moment of closure between two giants of hip-hop. He even went on to say that from that moment forward, he and Biggie were cool again. It was a neat package story, closure, forgiveness, brotherhood, perfect for interviews, documentaries, or a book. But once again, Gene Deal poured cold water on the whole thing.
Pac was angry not only because they said, not just because of that interview. A couple weeks before that, people don't know that Pac and Snoop did songs dissing Biggie. I remember hearing it. But Pac looking at it like, come on, man, you were just in LA dissing him with me. Now you on the radio saying something different. You know what I mean? So I think that triggered some type of attention, you know? Which was, I think it would have worked its way itself out. Pac had a lot, he did definitely have love for Snoop.
He couldn't confirm if the Atlanta meeting even happened, but he sure as hell questioned why Snoop supposedly felt comfortable pulling up to Biggie's hotel room in Atlanta, yet never showed face when Big was in California. The logic didn't add up, and the more you stack up these contradictions, the more Snoop starts to look like a man who carefully curates his version of history to always make himself look like the wise one, the hero, or the peacemaker. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Pac himself wasn't shy about calling Snoop out while he was still alive. What many people don't realize is that by the time Pac was murdered, his relationship with Snoop had completely crumbled. They weren't tight anymore. They weren't homies. They were barely speaking. And a lot of insiders point to jealousy as the root cause. Before Pac came home from prison and signed with Death Row, Snoop was the face of the label. He was Suge Knight's golden boy, the one everyone looked to as the West Coast's biggest star. But once Pac joined, the spotlight shifted almost overnight. Pac's energy, his charisma, his output, he completely overshadowed Snoop. And from that point on, their relationship was never the same. Pac came in with that larger-than-life energy, the kind that could take over any room, any stage, and any conversation without him even trying. Fresh out of prison and hungry to prove himself, he was recording music at a non-stop pace, sometimes knocking out 3 or 4 songs in a single night. He was dropping tracks, videos, interviews, and his voice was everywhere. Every label meeting, every magazine cover, every headline, Pac was the center of it all. Almost instantly, he snatched the spotlight, becoming the heartbeat of Death Row Records, the one everyone was watching. And while the fans were eating it up, insiders say Snoop wasn't taking that shift too well. For years, Snoop had been Suge Knight's golden child, the face of the West Coast, the young star who had carried Death Row through its early success. But suddenly, Pac's arrival flipped the script. The spotlight that once lived on Snoop was now shining brightly on Tupac. That jealousy didn't explode all at once. It crept in slowly, in the smallest things. A look here, a comment there, subtle tension in the studio sessions. But as time went on, it grew into something heavier, until finally, it all came to a breaking point that shook the entire label. That breaking point was none other than Hit 'Em Up, Pac's infamous diss track that scorched the airwaves and left the hip-hop world divided. In that song, Pac didn't just take aim, he launched missiles at Biggie, Puffy, Mobb Deep, and pretty much anyone associated with Bad Boy. It was raw, vicious, and unapologetic, the kind of record that cemented the East Coast versus West Coast beef in stone. It didn't just stir the pot, it flipped the whole damn table. At that time, the war between Death Row and Bad Boy was at its absolute peak. You were either riding with Pac and Death Row or standing with Biggie and Bad Boy. There was no middle ground. By the summer of 1996, tensions were boiling over in every city, and the streets themselves were feeling the weight of the beef.
I heard he made a record about me, and he was in New York, and nobody from New York is really, they talk it, man, but all them companies don't really hold it down.
In that climate, every move mattered, every word carried consequences. And when the Death Row crew traveled to New York for the MTV Video Music Awards, all eyes were on them. That's where Snoop's behavior started raising serious eyebrows.
At Snoop trailer, you know, he didn't say blood, because, you know, he ain't gonna say that, but, you know, that's what he tell me. And I barely understand him, but I got it. I understood him. Since the OG said, go over there and holler at him and try to, you know, calm him down, because I think they was throwing bottles at the trailer, at Snoop's trailer.
So Spice One pulled up to the set.
First came the missed rehearsal. Pac and Snoop were scheduled to appear together on Saturday Night Live, but Snoop skipped out, leaving Pac frustrated. That alone raised suspicion, but then came the move that Pac considered the ultimate betrayal. While in New York, Snoop popped up on a local radio station and casually said, "I got nothing but love for Biggie and Puffy." To outsiders, that might not sound like much, but if you understood just how deep the beef ran, you knew those words cut like a knife. At that moment, Snoop wasn't just offering an olive branch, he was stepping directly onto enemy turf and shaking hands with the very people Pac was going to war with. And to make matters worse, this was New York, Biggie's backyard, at the height of the conflict. To Pac, it felt like Snoop had slapped him in the face in front of the whole world. What burned Pac even more was the fact that just days earlier, Snoop had been right beside him in the studio, laying down verses on diss tracks aimed directly at Biggie and Puffy. One minute, Snoop was riding shotgun with Pac, dropping lines filled with venom, and the next, he was on the radio smiling and saying he had nothing but love for the same people they were dissing. To Pac, that was betrayal in its purest form. And the worst part, Pac never got the chance to sit down and hash things out with Snoop. Just weeks later, Vegas happened. Pac was gunned down and the chance for reconciliation died with him. After Pac's death, Snoop began pushing his side of the story, framing it as a misunderstanding. In interviews, he claimed Pac just didn't understand where he was coming from. He insisted that he never hated Biggie, never wanted to see Biggie hurt, that he was simply trying to rise above the beef. But to Pac's fans and to the people who were there, that explanation didn't sit right. If Snoop really had no problem with Biggie, then why was he in the booth dissing him alongside Pac? Why play both sides? Why talk tough in the studio and then flip the script in front of the media? To many, it looked like Snoop was protecting his own image, trying to stay cool with everybody while letting Pac take all the heat. And when Pac confronted him through his actions, Snoop dismissed it like Pac was just overreacting. The truth, as insiders saw it, was that it was Snoop sending the mixed signals all along. But if things were messy while Pac was alive, what happened afterward had people really questioning Snoop's loyalty, because not long after Pac's murder, a name started circulating heavy in whispers and rumors. Big Dre from the Southside Compton Crips. Most people know the name Orlando Anderson, the man long accused of being the shooter who killed Pac that night in Vegas. But some insiders believe Orlando wasn't the one who actually pulled the trigger. They believe it was Big Dre. Whether that's true or not is still debated to this day, but here's the wild part. After Pac's death, Snoop linked up with Big Dre, not in secret either. He worked with him publicly. Big Dre launched his own label, Runoff Records, and even dropped a mixtape titled Hard White. Somehow, this mixtape pulled in major features, including Warren G, MC8, and yes, Snoop Dogg himself. When the news broke, the streets lit up with questions. Where did Big Dre suddenly get the money and connections to pull in names like that? And more importantly, why would Snoop, of all people, agree to work with someone whose name was floating around in connection to Pac's murder? For many of Pac's fans, that was it. They saw Snoop's true colors shining through. To them, it felt like Pac's death didn't mean nearly as much to him as he wanted the world to believe. And once the backlash started heating up, Snoop quickly switched gears. Suddenly, every interview he gave was full of love and nostalgia for Pac. He painted their relationship as if they were inseparable until the very end, best friends who never had a bad word between them.
But Nas had a with guns.
Right.
So listen to what I'm telling you.
Yeah.
By me saying he didn't want none didn't mean he didn't punk out. It mean he just didn't want to
go there.
Pac didn't even see them. I did, because I got a gangbang mentality. I seen start circling and putting their hands in their pockets while Pac is in his ear telling me, I made a song dissing you, Jay-Z, Biggie.
But to people watching closely, it didn't feel genuine. It felt like damage control. It felt like Snoop was rewriting history yet again, smoothing over the cracks in his reputation to make sure the public saw him in the best possible light. But that wasn't the end of it. Another pattern people couldn't ignore was Snoop's habit of inflating his own gangster stories. Nobody's denying Snoop really came from the streets. His ties to the Rollin' 20s Crips are well documented, and his early life wasn't anything close to easy. But the issue is that Snoop has a tendency to take real moments and remix them into Hollywood-style stories that make him sound larger than life. Take his Training Day story, for example. Snoop once claimed that while filming the movie, he had ordered a blue tracksuit for his wardrobe. But when he showed up to the set, he realized they were shooting in deep blood territory, enemy turf for a Crip like him. According to Snoop, he just casually asked to speak with the local OG like it was no big deal. He claimed the OG rolled up in a wheelchair, just like the character he played in the movie, and that the two of them worked out a deal to keep the peace. Snoop said he dropped $300 on weed from the guy, and just like that, everything was cool. The set was safe, the movie went on, and Snoop came off like the ultimate street diplomat. But when the real story came out,
A great combo, man. He was like, you know, he explained that he thought I was dissing him, and he thought, and I, on the song The Message, you know what I'm saying? He thought I was dissing him, and I wasn't even thinking about when I wrote that record. Just right, it was just going. You know what I'm saying? It was just going, hey, you know, just coming. So he thought that, and then I was like, well, I heard you was coming at me. I said, no, it was about you, but I heard you was coming at me. You know, back and forth.
it was nothing like that. According to Spice One, a Bay Area legend in gangster rap, the Bloods in that neighborhood weren't trying to make peace at all. They were ready to start trouble. They were mobbing outside Snoop's trailer, throwing bottles, trying to intimidate him. And while Snoop was ducked off inside, it wasn't him who handled the situation. It was Spice One who got the call. One of his OG homies rang him up, warning that things were about to go left in a hurry. Spice pulled up to the set, and the second the Bloods saw him, everything changed. Spice didn't need to flex or act tough. His name alone carried weight. The Bloods respected him, and that respect cooled the situation instantly. He reminded them that if things got out of hand, the cops would swarm the block and make everyone's life harder. Nobody wanted that heat, so the Bloods backed off, slid around the corner, sparked some weed, and chilled until the police came and went. Once the coast was clear, Spice circled back to Snoop's trailer. They kicked it, smoked, and Snoop remained oblivious to just how close things had come to exploding outside. And that's the kicker. Time and time again, Snoop tells stories that put him in the spotlight, stories that make him the hero or the peacemaker. And while he still gets his flowers in hip-hop, those stories leave cracks in his image. Because when you peel back the layers, when you hear from the people who were really there, you start to wonder how much of Snoop's legend is reality and how much is just clever storytelling.